A simple doorbell camera caught a delivery that is all it was ever supposed to record. Somebody orders some food. The driver drops the bag off. The camera records just a few seconds of motion, and then it just goes back to waiting. At approximately 2:48 p.m., investigators found an unidentified body matching the clothing description of our missing person. We are still waiting for the county coroner to identify her. We have requested the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division to investigate this death. That is the entire purpose of a doorbell camera. Mundane. Truly forgettable. Most of that footage is erased automatically because nobody ever needs to watch it. But this time, someone absolutely needed to see it, because just 8 days after that footage was recorded, a 39-year-old woman named Elena Moore walked right out of a gym in Lexington, South Carolina, and never made it home. And when a couple living in a nearby apartment complex noticed her photo circulating on a missing person flyer, they looked at each other and realized, oh, wait a second. That is her. That is the exact woman from our door. This is where our story truly begins. We rely on the Post and Courier, NBC News, ABC Columbia, and Fox News, Fitz News, and on-the-record interviews conducted by News Nation correspondent Mills Hayes and Ashley Banfield's Drop Dead Serious podcast, plus statements from Lexington Police Chief Terrence Green and Lexington County Coroner Margaret Fisher, fully sourced and thoroughly verified. No cause of death has been determined yet. No individual has been named a suspect or charged with any crime in connection with Elena Moore's disappearance or death. This remains an active, ongoing investigation, and everyone discussed in this video is strictly presumed innocent unless and until proven otherwise in a court of law. Be sure to subscribe and turn on notifications. Let me take you back 8 days before anyone knew Elena's name. June 4th, 2026. Inside an apartment complex called Overlook Golden Hills in Lexington, South Carolina, a married couple named Sarah Burles and her husband, John Moore, no relation to Elena, that is just a pure coincidence, are at home. A DoorDash delivery arrives, looking totally ordinary. The driver sets the food down. A standard contactless drop-off, and then the doorbell rings again. John Moore answers it. And standing right there, holding the bag of food, reading the receipt like she is trying to confirm something, is a woman he has never seen before. He assumes she is the delivery driver, maybe a coworker, or maybe she is just helping out. Taking the bag, he mutters a quick thanks and starts to turn back inside. But she takes a step forward, like she is about to walk right inside with him. I want you to sit with that for a second, because this is the exact moment that the couple has replayed in their minds. Presumably, they have gone over it more times than they can count since discovering who she actually was. John told News Nation directly, sharing his exact words. Once I got the food from her and turned around to walk back in, right when she started to walk into the house with me, she seemed incredibly confused and disoriented about where she was or what she was doing. Confused, disoriented, he stares at her. She catches herself, muttering something like, "Oh, just a delivery." She turns around, walking away. That should have been the end of it. Just a strange, slightly uncomfortable 30 seconds. The kind of thing you quickly mention to your spouse that night and completely forget by the weekend. But it was not the end of it. Because about an hour later, and this is the part that genuinely unsettles me, Sarah looks outside again, and the exact same woman is still out there. Only now she is at the neighbor's door, sitting cross-legged on the concrete porch, going through the neighbor's packages. Sarah described this scene to Mills Hayes. She said the woman was on her phone, or at least it looked like it. Yet she could not tell if the woman was actually talking to someone or just holding the device up to her ear. She said she heard a faint noise coming from the phone, but no actual human voice. So Sarah walks over and asks her directly, "Do you actually know my neighbor?" And the woman just says no. So Sarah asked the obvious next question. Well, what exactly are you doing? Here is her answer. I really want you to listen to this closely, because I do not think there are more honest, more deeply unsettling words in this entire case. She said honestly, I do not know. I do not know what I am doing. I am waiting for a friend. She did not say she thought this was her building. Absolutely no explanation followed, not even a flimsy one. Just a completely open admission to a total stranger that she had absolutely no idea why she was sitting on someone else's porch going through their private mail. Sarah gently asked her to leave the neighbors' things alone. The woman just said, okay. She stood up, walked right down the steps, and that was pretty much it. Sarah did not call the police. Why would she? Nobody was being threatening. Nobody was breaking any property. It was strange, genuinely strange. But in that moment, it was not an emergency. It seemed like someone having a bad day, maybe dehydrated, or perhaps confused by the intense heat. Folks in Lexington kept telling me, look, Lexington is hot and humid, and if you just finished a grueling workout, feeling completely disoriented is not out of the question. I want to be entirely fair to that explanation, because it represents a very real possibility, and I am certainly not going to pretend it is not. But here is what I cannot get past. Only 8 days later, this woman disappears. And when she does, 2 separate witnesses, completely independent of each other, go on to describe the exact same thing. Confused, disoriented, completely out of it. Let us go back to June 11th, 2026. The exact night, everything changes. At 6:40 in the evening, Elena Moore signs herself in at a Planet Fitness over on Whiteford Way in Lexington. This is her regular gym. This is routine. Nothing about this particular moment, on its own, raises any flags. But she leaves. Police later confirmed she did not actually have her car with her. She heads out on foot, walking toward a dense wooded area behind a nearby Lowe's home improvement store. That is already deeply strange, a woman walking entirely alone at night toward the tree line behind a massive big box store parking lot. But it gets even stranger. New surveillance footage obtained later in the investigation captures Elena once again. This time, it is 9:17 in the evening, a full 2.5 hours after she first signed into that gym. She is seen in the parking lot of a Publix grocery store at 100 Old Cherokee Road. Same outfit, that olive green zip-up hoodie and black athletic pants. This time, she is seen walking directly in the direction of Old Cherokee Road itself. And that remains the very last confirmed sighting of Elena Moore alive. 2.5 hours are completely unaccounted for between the gym and that lot. She had no vehicle, and quite possibly no working phone. Investigators now say her phone stopped pinging entirely by the following Monday. The next day, June 12th, her husband, Brannon Slice, officially reports her missing. Now, here is where we need to talk about something that I believe gets completely lost in most of the coverage of this case. It is easy to rush right past it to get to the more dramatic parts. But this matters. It really does. In the early hours of this investigation, police actually got 2 separate things wrong, publicly, right on the record. First, they claimed Elena's last known sighting was at a local CVS, which turned out to be completely false. They had to walk that back. Then, and this one is much worse, somewhere in the sheer chaos of this case, word got out. Word got out that she had finally been found, and that everything was fine. But it simply was not true. I keep thinking about what that must have felt like for her family to hear, even briefly, that she had been found completely safe. And then to have that hope taken away, that is truly not a small mistake. That is the kind of error that, in a missing persons case, causes very real and specific harm. It causes real harm to the people who are already living through the absolute worst week of their lives. Now, I am not saying this just to pile on the Lexington Police Department. These investigations are naturally chaotic. Information moves fast and sometimes inaccurately, especially during those first 24 to 48 hours. But it is still worth naming because it is a key part of the full picture of how this case unfolded. And because it explains some of the heavy frustration that has been building publicly around how this investigation has been handled. Now, let us talk about the search itself. The police deployed a drone to scan those dense woods behind Planet Fitness and Lowe's, the very direction Elena was last seen walking. Absolutely nothing. By Monday, June 15th, a massive search effort assembled, including the Lexington County Sheriff's Department, the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, the Department of Natural Resources, Highway Patrol, Fire Services, and EMS. They combed every inch of the thick woods along Kaufman Farm Lane, searching house by house, tree by tree. Police Chief Terrence Green made a point of telling everyone directly, this is not a recovery operation. We are simply ruling out locations, staying methodical. But they found nothing. Then, in the endless noise of social media, a rumor spread that Elena had finally been found. People shared the post. Relief spread through a community that had spent days in absolute fear. But then, the police had to correct the record. It was completely false. She was not actually found. Let us pause here for a moment, because this specific detail, the way false information spread faster than actual confirmed facts, tells us something very important about how these modern missing person cases play out online today. Live streamers were right at the search site. People were filming content, some even laughing on camera, while volunteers and investigators worked. Elena's friends told reporters they found that behavior deeply insensitive. I completely understand why. It is a tough balance to strike, but that public attention brings in tips. It brings in the exact kind of neighbor who eventually calls and says, wait, I think I actually saw her. That specific tip is what finally led detectives to the right search area. But when that same attention curdles into cheap entertainment, it definitely costs something too. It completely stripped the family of their privacy during the absolute worst moment of their lives. Now, we have to look closely at June 16th and 17th. Because this is where everything turns. A local resident comes forward. They tell police they saw Elena heading into the deep woods near Lakeside Middle School, just down the road from that Publix on the night she vanished, June 11th. That tip is acted on fast. Around 1:30 in the afternoon on Wednesday, June 17th, officers and fire crews begin a massive, thorough search of the woods around Old Cherokee Road. Multiple agencies are on foot, slowly combing through the thick trees. At 2:48 that afternoon, barely an hour later, they find a body. At the press conference, Police Chief Green said at approximately 2:48 in the afternoon, we located an unidentified body that matches the clothing description of our missing person. Lexington County Coroner Margaret Fisher quickly released a statement. I want to read you her exact words, because the precision of this statement really matters. No positive identification has been made as of this moment. We will await positive identification before any further information is released. And no cause of death has been determined yet. An autopsy will be scheduled very soon. And this entire process will take time. As of the most recent official reporting, that statement is exactly where everything still stands. With no positive identification, no cause of death, and an autopsy that hasn't happened yet, I want to be extremely careful here, and I need you to be careful too. We do not know, not officially, not yet, if this is actually Elena. We do not know how this person died, and anyone telling you otherwise is getting way ahead of the evidence. But here is what we do know. And this is the one detail that completely stopped me in my tracks. Lexington Police officially requested that the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division, known as SLED, take over this death investigation. SLED is the state's premier major crimes unit. They are the agency brought in for homicides, for highly complex deaths, for those difficult cases that require deep resources beyond what local police can handle on their own. When a reporter asked point blank if foul play was suspected, Chief Green did not say no. He simply repeated that it is an active case and that SLED is investigating. That is not the language of a department that believes a woman simply wandered into the woods and succumbed to the summer heat. Now, I am not saying this completely rules that possibility out. Severe exposure, a sudden medical event, or a struggle linked to a mental health crisis are all still on the table until the autopsy says otherwise. But local police departments do not call in their state's major crimes division for routine, non-suspicious deaths. That is just not how this works. Something about what investigators saw at that scene made them decide they needed far more than what their own department could bring to it. There is a heavy piece of this story I have not fully addressed yet, and I think it deserves genuine, careful focus, because it involves something private and highly serious. Elena's mental health. Multiple sources, including people close to Elena who spoke to News Nation on condition of anonymity, say that in the weeks before she vanished, Elena had recently been released from a facility called 3 Rivers, a local mental health treatment center in the area. This has still not been officially confirmed by police. I want to repeat that clearly. This has not yet been confirmed by police. It is reporting from sourced individuals that has not yet been verified through an official statement. But if it is accurate, it reframes everything we have talked about so far. The disorientation on that Ring camera, the confusion at the neighbor's door, those 2.5 unaccounted for hours between the gym and that final public sighting. It starts to look less like an isolated, strange moment and more like a tragic pattern. A woman who may have been in real, ongoing distress in the days and weeks leading up to her disappearance. And if that is true, it opens up one of the 2 most likely explanations investigators are almost certainly weighing right now. The first is that Elena was in a genuine, severe mental health crisis. She walked into those woods disoriented, alone, in deep distress. And whatever happened next was a tragic accident, or a medical event, or something self-inflicted, heartbreaking, devastating for everyone who loved her. But not a crime in the way true crime audiences usually mean that word. The second explanation is that someone else was involved. Her vulnerability, which was visible, documented, and witnessed by multiple strangers in the week before she vanished, was something someone else clearly recognized and took advantage of. Both of those explanations remain fully open, genuinely open. I am not going to pretend I know which one this is, because nobody outside of SLED and the coroner's office actually knows yet, and anyone presenting this with absolute certainty right now is not being honest with you. I do want to address her husband, Brannon Slice, because the internet has already moved incredibly fast on him. And I think it's worth slowing down. Police said early, very early on, that Brannon is not considered a person of interest. He is the one who reported Elena missing, a private investigator who has been assisting with the case. Harry Dukes told Newsweek that Brannon has been distraught over her disappearance, but there are some specific details that have raised some highly legitimate questions, and I want to walk through them honestly rather than either dismissing them or running wild with them. Brannon reportedly has a solid background in law enforcement and currently works as a private investigator. Mills Hayes, reporting for News Nation, noted that this could explain why police may have moved so quickly to clear him. Professional familiarity, possibly even personal relationships within departments. That is speculation on her part, clearly labeled as such. But it's a reasonable question to ask out loud. Why was someone cleared this quickly, this early in a case where so much still remains genuinely unknown? There was also a Facebook comment, since deleted, in which Brannon reportedly described Elena as not being well. Just 2 words. and then the post disappeared. I think there are two very different ways to read that, and I want to present both honestly. One reading is troubling. Why delete something when your wife is missing? What exactly does that protect, and who does it protect? The other reading is almost the complete opposite. Maybe he was trying to gently explain her disappearance to people who knew them without publicly disclosing private medical details that were not his to share. That is not nothing. That is actually a fairly normal instinct for someone trying to protect a spouse's privacy, even in a time of crisis. Mills Hayes also reported that Brannon had been advised not to speak to any media. Ashley Banfield, who is covering the story separately, raised a really pointed question about that exact advice. Advice not to speak to the press typically comes from a lawyer, not from the police. If the police are actually the ones suggesting that silence, then that is worth sitting with too. I do not have any easy answer for you on Brannon's slice. I certainly have questions. The very same ones multiple journalists covering this case have raised publicly and on the record. But what I absolutely will not do is tell you that he is guilty of anything, because there is currently zero evidence presented publicly that supports that kind of conclusion. Innocent people have certainly been wrongly suspected in cases like this before, and the cost of that, even when it is eventually corrected, is very real and lasting. I constantly keep coming back to something Sarah Burleson said, not about Elena specifically, but about her very own daughters. She has 4 young girls. Their apartment complex was actually close enough to that shopping center that her kids have always wanted to walk up there completely on their own. She used to tell them no, mostly just out of normal parental caution. But now she says there is absolutely no question that she will not let them walk alone. Not after this. Not when they still do not know what happened to the woman who showed up at their door just 8 days before she disappeared. That is the exact kind of damage that never shows up in an official press conference. The overall community's sense of its own safety quietly recalibrated, one household at a time. Elena Catherine Moore was only 39 years old, and she worked as a personal trainer. She also worked at a CVS pharmacy and bartended at multiple popular places around Lexington, which meant that a lot of people in that town knew her face, even if they did not know her name. Friends described her as active on social media, highly visible, and fully engaged. This made the sudden silence in the weeks leading up to her disappearance stand out even more sharply to the people who knew her. She had been adopted from Russia as a young child, raised by a loving family in South Carolina. She had actually been with her husband for more than 13 years before they finally married in 2024. She trained their bodies, she poured their drinks, and she filled their prescriptions. In a town of only about 23,000 people, that quickly adds up to a lot of local faces who knew her even briefly or just in passing. Right now, there is still no positive identification. There is still no determined cause of death. There is an autopsy report still to come, along with toxicology results that, by every account from people who have covered cases like this, can easily take weeks. But what there is, and what I keep returning to, is a simple doorbell camera that caught 30 ordinary seconds of absolutely nothing. It captured a simple delivery, a confused woman, and a strange moment that really should have meant absolutely nothing. And then, 8 days later, it became the very first piece of a story that a state major crimes unit is now working hard to finish. If you have any information whatsoever related to the disappearance of Elena Moore, please contact the Lexington Police Department immediately. You can also reach out to the South Carolina Law Enforcement Division. All tip information is linked in the description below. No official cause of death has been determined yet. No individual has been named as a suspect or charged with any crime. This remains a highly active investigation, and everyone discussed in this episode is strictly presumed innocent unless and until proven otherwise in a court of law. Subscribe for more updates on this case. Every victim deserves the truth. Every single story deserves to be told.